The scariest part about a life sentence is realizing you did not lose your life in one loud moment. You lost it the way a man loses his hearing, little by little, until one day you notice the silence and understand it has been there for years. My name is Raymond Holt, and I'm 78 years old. I'm serving life, and the quiet mistakes that ruined me were not what you think. People imagine a dramatic night, a flash, a scream, a headline, but the truth is uglier because it is ordinary. It was years of denial, years of excuses, and years of choosing the wrong people when it mattered most. In here, the days come with a rhythm you can set your bones to. Count in the morning, count at night. Shoes on concrete in the tier, the same squeak in the same spot. Chow hall trays clattering like the building itself is impatient. The yard when you're allowed it, the wind carrying somebody else's laughter as if it belongs to another world. Lockdowns that arrive without warning and make the whole place feel like a held breath. If you live long enough inside a routine like this, you start measuring time by small objects instead of big events. For me, it's a calendar, not the pretty kind you hang in a kitchen with beaches and puppies. I'm talking about a cheap little calendar I keep folded inside a paperback so it doesn't get handled by anyone who thinks it's funny to take your hope away. Every night I cross off the day with a pen that's running out of ink. It's become a habit so deep it feels like brushing my teeth used to feel. Even when the day was nothing but the same walls and the same faces, I cross it off like I earned something. I started doing that in my first year, when I still believed time was a thing you could spend and get something back for. Back then, I'd cross off the day and tell myself it meant I was closer to going home, closer to getting my name back, closer to the life I thought was waiting in a drawer somewhere, folded and preserved like a good shirt. Now I cross off the day because it proves I'm still here. Before prison, I was not a monster in my own mind. I was a man who thought he was decent and misunderstood. I was a man who told himself the story he needed to hear in order to sleep. I worked jobs that came and went. I had a laugh that people liked. I knew how to make a room feel lighter for a moment, and I mistook that for character. I grew up in a house where the bills were always late and the tempers were always early. My father didn't hit me, not the way some men did in those days, but he had a way of looking through you, like you were already a disappointment he'd accepted. My mother worked herself tired and then worked herself angrier. I learned early that being quiet kept you safe and being charming got you forgiven. So I became charming. I learned to say it's nothing, even when it was something. I learned to laugh when I should have apologized. I learned to make excuses sound like reasons. If you asked me where my paycheck went, I could give you a story. If you asked me why I missed another family thing, I could give you a story. If you asked me why I was always around men who looked like trouble, I could give you a story. And I believe my own stories. That is what denial looks like. Not a man screaming at the sky, but a man calmly explaining why he deserves one more pass. A man saying, just this once, just until I get back on my feet, just until the next check, just until the pressure eases. A man postponing responsibility like it's a bill that can wait. I married young, not because I was ready, but because I loved the way it made me feel to be chosen. Her name was Linda, and she had a steady kind of goodness that I mistook for something that would always be there no matter what I did. She worked mornings and came home smelling like coffee and soap. She put notes in my lunch when I had a job that lasted long enough to need a lunch. When our first boy was born, I held him and felt something open in me like a door, and I promised myself I would be better than my father. Then I went right back to my habits because promises are easy when you're holding a baby and everyone is smiling. The first wrong people I chose were not strangers in an alley. They were the men I already knew, the ones who had been around since I was young, the ones who always had a plan, always had a story, always had a way to make money sound simple. They were the guys who made you feel like you weren't falling behind as long as you stood close to them. I told myself they were just friends. If I'm honest, they were not friends. They were mirrors. They reflected the version of me that didn't have to change. Around them, my excuses were normal. Around them, my anger was justified. Around them, my little compromises were jokes you told over beer, and the consequences were always something that happened to someone else. There were chances to turn away. That's the part people don't like to hear, because it makes the ending feel less like fate and more like choice. I had chances when Linda asked me to come home early and I said I couldn't. I had chances when my son had a school thing and I'd promised I'd be there, and then I didn't show because some guy needed a ride because a quick errand turned into a long night. I had chances when my mother looked at me one afternoon and said, "You're running with men who don't care if you drown," and I laughed like she was being dramatic. I was not blind. I was choosing not to see. I can take you to a particular afternoon that didn't feel like a turning point at the time, but it was. It was warm out, the kind of day where the air feels thick and everyone moves slower. Linda had left a note on the counter about diapers. Just a plain reminder. My boy was toddling around, holding a plastic spoon like it was a sword. I was supposed to take them both to her sister's for dinner. I had even told her, "We'll be there." Then my phone rang. It was a man named Curtis. Curtis had a voice that always sounded like he was smiling at you, even when he wasn't. He said he needed help with something quick. He said there was money in it, and he said it in that casual way, like it was nothing, like it was groceries. I remember looking at the note on the counter, then looking at my son with his spoon, and feeling two different lives tug on me. One life was quiet and a little boring and full of responsibility. The other life was the one I'd been feeding for years, the one that made me feel like I still had options, like I wasn't trapped in bills and routines and the slow grind of being ordinary. I told myself I'd do the quick thing and still make it to dinner. That was the rationalization. That was the lie, with good posture. I kissed my son's forehead, told Linda I'd meet them there, and I walked out the door with that familiar feeling in my chest, the feeling of stepping into trouble while insisting you're still a decent man. That was the moment, not the night of the crime, not the courtroom, not the sentence. That afternoon, that decision. The way I chose the wrong people again, knowing what they were, because I wanted the easy way to feel like the clever way. From there, the years started stacking up like papers you don't open. It wasn't one act. It was a pattern. It was small jobs that weren't supposed to hurt anyone, favors that were supposed to be temporary, lies that were supposed to protect my family. I told myself I was doing it for them, that I was making sure they had what they needed. But the truth is, I was doing it to avoid the humiliation of being the kind of man who couldn't provide the normal way. Pride is a quiet poison. It doesn't announce itself. It sounds like dignity. It sounds like, "I refuse to be looked down on." It sounds like, "I won't let my family struggle." It sounds like, "I'm not like those other guys." Meanwhile, it pushes you into decisions that make your family lose you entirely. Linda started going quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that means a person has run out of words that matter. She would look at me like she was trying to remember who I used to be. My son would watch me from the hallway, small and serious, like he was learning something from my footsteps. I felt it, but I pushed it down, because facing it would mean changing, and changing would mean admitting I had been wrong. Then came the crime that made the state say, "Enough." I'm not going to dress it up. I'm not going to turn it into a story where I'm a victim of bad luck. The truth is, I put myself in a situation I had no business being in, with men I had no business trusting, and I made choices I can't take back. It wasn't a movie scene. It was messy, confused, full of panic and stupid thinking. It was the end of a long line of just this once, and by then my just this once had become who I was. When the door finally came down, when the cuffs went on, when I heard my own name spoken like it belonged to a stranger, I still tried to bargain with reality. In the holding cell, I told myself it would work out. I told myself the truth would come out. I told myself I'd do a few years, maybe less, and I'd be back. Denial does not stop at the moment you get caught. It just changes clothes. The trial was a blur of suits and whispers. Linda sat behind me one day, and when I turned my head and saw her, I felt relief, like she was proof that I wasn't the person they were describing. Then I saw her eyes. She wasn't looking at me like a wife. She was looking at me like a mother watching her child drown, tired from pulling him out over and over. I wanted to say I was sorry. I wanted to say I didn't mean to. I wanted to say it wasn't supposed to go this way. But I didn't say it. I was still clinging to my pride. I was still trying to look like a man who had control. The judge's words were calm. That's what people don't understand. A life sentence is not always delivered with thunder. Sometimes it's delivered like paperwork. Sometimes it's delivered with the tone of a man reading something he has read many times before. When he said it, my mind rejected it the way the body rejects a bad taste. I remember thinking, he can't mean that. He can't be talking about my whole life. But he was. I arrived here with a box of intake items, an inmate number that replaced my name in the mouths of strangers, and a head full of noise. The first night in a dorm full of men, the air smelled like sweat and disinfectant and old anger. Someone was snoring. Someone was crying quietly, like they didn't want to be caught. A guard's keys rattled down the walkway, and I realized how thin a mattress can be when you're trying to sleep on regret. I told myself, this is temporary. Then my calendar became my companion. I started crossing off days as if I could cross my way out. The years inside teach you things you never asked to learn. You learn how to read a room in a second. You learn how to keep your face neutral when you feel something sharp. You learn how to make a phone call in 15 minutes feel like a whole life, and then hang up and stare at the wall because you can still hear your child's voice after the line goes dead. The prison phone is its own kind of truth. It does not care about your excuses. It does not soften anything. It makes you say what you mean quickly, because the clock is running, because there's a line behind you, because the receiver smells like other people's hands and other people's grief. At first, Linda answered. Her voice was guarded, like she was speaking through a cracked door. She told me the boys were fine. She told me she was working. She told me what she thought I needed to hear so we could get off the phone without falling apart. I told her I loved her, and she didn't say it back every time. When she finally stopped answering, I told myself she was busy. I told myself she needed space. I told myself she'd come around. Denial again. Always denial. My sons grew up while I stared at concrete. Birthdays passed. School pictures came in the mail. One year, I got a Christmas card with their faces, and I stared at it for an hour, trying to recognize the little boys I had left behind. I kept crossing off days. The calendar filled up with X marks like a graveyard. The turning point inside did not come with a fight or a dramatic announcement. It came on a day that was quiet enough to hear your own thoughts. I had a parole hearing. I'd waited years for it. I'd told myself that by then I'd be older, calmer, different. I'd done my programs, kept my nose clean, held a job in here that made me feel useful. I had built a story in my head where the system would see me as a man who deserved another chance. They brought me into a small room that smelled like stale coffee and paper. The parole board members sat with their folders, eyes tired, expressions practiced. I was dressed in prison clothes that never let you forget where you are, no matter how politely you speak. I talked about remorse. I talked about lessons. I talked about how I would live if I got out. I talked like a man trying to sound safe. One of them looked down at the file, then up at me, and said in a voice so plain it felt like being pressed under a hand, "Mr. Holt, you are not suitable for release." That was it. No sermon, no anger, just a door closing. I remember nodding like I understood because my pride still wanted me to look composed. I remember being escorted back through hallways I knew by heart. I remember the sound of my own breathing, louder than usual. When I got back to my bunk, I sat down and stared at the underside of the bed above me, at the scratches in the metal, at the gum stuck to a corner like somebody's old defiance. That night, I crossed off the day on my calendar with a hand that shook. In that moment, my last illusion died. Not the illusion that I was innocent, because I knew what I'd done, but the illusion that I could outweigh my consequences. The illusion that time would soften the truth. The illusion that life would eventually return to me the way a lost dog returns home. I realized something simple and terrible. I might die in here, and my story would end with me still insisting it was not really my fault. That thought scared me more than the sentence did. Because punishment I could endure. Prison is built for endurance. Men endure hunger, cold, noise, loneliness, missing their children, missing their own faces in the mirror. Endurance is what this place trains into you. But responsibility is different. Responsibility asks you to stop hiding from yourself. The next morning, I went to chow hall with that parole denial sitting in my chest like a stone. The room was loud, men joking, arguing, trading food, the same everyday life continuing like nothing had changed. I carried my tray and sat down, and across from me was an older man named Ellis, a lifer like me. He had hands that looked like tree roots, and eyes that had seen too much without turning mean. He watched me push food around with my fork and said, "You keep eating like that, you'll starve with a full tray." That was the line. That was the first time someone named what I was doing. I laughed a little, out of habit, but the laugh didn't land. I looked at him and felt my throat tighten. I wanted to say I'd been denied parole. I wanted to say it was unfair. I wanted to say they don't see who I am now. Instead, I said, "I did this to myself." The words came out quieter than I expected, and once they were out, they didn't go back in. Ellis didn't congratulate me. He didn't pat my back. He just nodded like a man hearing something late but necessary. After that, my change was not a transformation. There was no bright moment where the world looked new. I still woke up in the same place. I still stood for count. I still heard the keys and the shouting and the intercom. But I stopped feeding my old story. I started taking small steps that didn't make headlines. I signed up for a class where men learn how to speak without performing. I started writing letters I didn't send right away because I wanted to tell the truth and not just dump my guilt on someone else. I went to the chapel sometimes, not because I became holy, but because it was one of the only quiet rooms in the whole facility, and I needed to sit where my thoughts weren't interrupted every 10 seconds. And I kept my calendar, but I stopped crossing off days like I was earning my way out. I started crossing them off as a reminder that time is not forgiveness. Time is just time. It passes whether you change or not. One afternoon I asked for the phone list and saw my older son's number still there, written in my own handwriting from years earlier. I stared at it so long my eyes went blurry. I could hear my heart in my ears. My finger hovered over the buttons like the phone might bite me. I dialed. When he answered, there was a pause before he spoke, like he didn't recognize the number, like he didn't recognize the man who belonged to it. His voice was deeper than I remembered. It had a guardedness that made me feel both ashamed and grateful, because it meant he had survived without me. I said his name, and then I said mine, because in here you learn that nothing is assumed. He didn't yell, he didn't cry, he didn't accuse, he just listened, and that was somehow harder than anger. I didn't make excuses. I didn't talk about the parole board. I didn't talk about how hard prison is. I didn't try to make him feel sorry for me. I told him I was calling to say I finally understood something I should have understood decades ago. I told him I chose the wrong people over and over until it cost all of us. I told him that the life he lost was not lost in one night, it was lost in the years I kept promising I would do better next time. There was silence on the line. The prison phone amplifies silence. It makes it a room you can't leave. Then he said very quietly, I didn't need you to be perfect. I needed you to be honest. That sentence did something to me. Not because it excused me, but because it named the difference between punishment and responsibility. Punishment is what the state gives you. Responsibility is what you finally give yourself. After that call, I sat on my bunk and stared at my calendar until the edges of the paper curled more in my hands. I thought about all the rationalizations I had fed myself, all the ways I had tried to stay comfortable inside my own lies. I thought about the men I called friends, the ones who would have watched me fall without reaching for me. I thought about Linda's tired eyes in that courtroom. I thought about my son holding a plastic spoon like a sword, and the way I walked out of that kitchen believing I could return to it whenever I wanted. That's the part I wish I could hand back to you, the viewer, like a warning you can actually hold. It is not always the dramatic choice that ruins you. Sometimes it's the quiet one. Sometimes it's the decision you make with a calm face and a reasonable voice. Sometimes it's the phone call you answer when you should have let it ring. Sometimes it's the way you tell yourself, I'll fix it later. And you keep saying later until later is gone. In here, men talk about being punished like it's the whole story. But I have learned something sitting on this bunk year after year, listening to the building breathe at night. Punishment can make you harder. Responsibility makes you honest. Punishment can make you resentful. Responsibility makes you clear. Punishment is external. Responsibility is the moment you stop lying to yourself, even when the truth hurts more than the sentence. I still cross off my calendar every night. The pen is almost out, so sometimes the X is faint and I have to go over it twice. Some nights my hand aches. Some nights the lights flicker and you can hear somebody arguing 2 tiers down. Some nights there's a lockdown and you hear the doors slam and you wonder how many more nights you have. But now, when I cross off the day, I don't do it to pretend I'm escaping. I do it to remind myself that my life is still made of choices, even in here. I can choose whether I tell the truth on the phone. I can choose whether I write a letter that owns what I did without begging to be rescued from it. I can choose whether I spend my remaining years blaming everyone else, or whether I finally look at the man in the mirror and call him by his real name. If you're still free, I'm not going to preach at you. I'm not going to tell you that one bad friend will ruin your life like a scare story told to kids. Real life is more gradual than that. It's 100 small decisions that feel harmless. It's the way you let denial become your personality. It's the way you treat your excuses like they're facts. It's the way you keep choosing the wrong people because they make you feel strong, when really they are just helping you avoid becoming better. So I'll just tell you what I wish someone had told me when I still had a kitchen table and a family waiting for me at dinner. Pay attention to the quiet rationalizations, the ones that sound reasonable, the ones that let you delay the truth, because a life can be lost slowly and you won't notice what you traded away until the door shuts and the world keeps going without you. Tonight, I will lie down on this bunk and the mattress will be thin and the air will smell like metal and soap, and somewhere down the tier a man will laugh like he hasn't given up yet. I will cross off another day on my calendar and I will do it carefully because it is proof that time is still moving. And if you're listening still outside these walls, I hope you cross off your days differently than I did, not as a countdown to some rescue, but as a reminder that the smallest choices are not small when you repeat them, and the people you choose when it matters most can decide what kind of life you get to keep.